Amara sat at the long dining table in her parents' grand home in Enugu, the kind of place that always seemed too polished to be comfortable. The chandeliers sparkled above, the silverware shone, and the table was crowded with relatives dressed in their best clothes. Laughter filled the air as her siblings took turns talking about their lives, her brother describing his latest deal in London, her sister boasting about her medical research abroad. Everyone clapped and praised them. Amara, meanwhile, sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She smiled faintly when expected but said little. She had learned long ago that silence drew less attention than speaking. Still, she could feel the weight of every glance, as if people were waiting for her to contribute, to list some grand achievement of her. Her parents exchanged looks, the kind that said the silence had gone on long enough. Her father leaned forward, his voice sharp but calm. "Amara, and you? What exactly are you doing with your life these days?" The room fell quieter, forks pausing in midair. Amara's throat tightened. She opened her mouth but quickly closed it again, unsure what to say in front of so many eyes. Her mother sighed loudly, shaking her head. "You can't just sit there forever, my dear. Look at your siblings. Look at your cousins. Everyone is moving forward." A heavy pause followed. Amara lowered her gaze to her plate, the rich food suddenly tasting like ash. The laughter from earlier had shifted into an uncomfortable silence, and tension wrapped itself around the table like smoke. The silence in the dining room stretched too long, and Amara wished she could shrink into her chair. But her father's patience had run out. He pushed his glass aside and raised his voice so loudly that even the housemaids passing in the hallway froze. "You are the shame of this family, Amara," he said, each word like a slap. "Look around you. Your brother is building companies abroad, your sister is saving lives, your cousins are winning a war. And you? What do you have to show for yourself?" The table buzzed with whispers. Some of the younger relatives looked at their plates, pretending not to hear. Others smirked, eager to witness the drama unfold. Amara's chest tightened, but she didn't move. She kept her face calm even though her heart was breaking inside. She could feel her aunt's sharp gaze on her, her uncle's quiet judgment, and the pity in her younger cousin's eyes. Her mother quickly joined in, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Your father is right. Sometimes I wonder if you even think about us at all. Do you know how embarrassing it is when people ask me about you? I can't say anything proud. How do you think that feels? Your cousins in America are engineers, doctors, even lawyers, and you sit here like a child who has no direction." Each word stung like salt poured on a wound. The comparisons, the shame, the reminder that in their eyes she was nothing. Amara pressed her palms together under the table, nails digging into her skin to keep from trembling. She forced herself to breathe slowly. No one in that room knew the battles she had fought, the risks she had taken, the secret life she was building far away from there. They only saw what they wanted to see, a quiet girl who hadn't lived up to their expectations. But inside, Amara knew something they didn't. She wasn't the failure they believed. She had already built something that would change their words into dust one day. For now, she let them laugh, compare, and humiliate her. She let her father's voice thunder, her mother's disappointment echo, and the whispers sting. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She blinked back the tears that threatened to fall, her face calm like a stone. Only her heart knew the truth, and it beat steadily with one thought. "They have no idea who I really am." The room was still thick with her father's words, and her mother's sharp comparisons still hung in the air like knives. Amara sat there, staring at her plate, her eyes burning though she refused to let the tears fall. Every sound in the dining room felt louder, the clink of a fork, the shuffle of someone shifting in their chair, the low whispers spreading around the table. She finally reached for her napkin, pressing it gently against her eyes. A single tear escaped, and she wiped it away before anyone could catch it. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, didn't even try to defend herself. What was the point? They weren't ready to listen. Taking a slow breath, Amara pushed her chair back. The legs scraped against the polished floor, pulling everyone's attention toward her. The room fell into an uneasy silence again. She stood, straightened her shoulders, and with a voice soft but steady, she said, "Thank you for dinner." That was all. No excuses, no explanations, just gratitude that sounded too calm for the storm she was walking out of. Her relatives exchanged looks. Some leaned closer to whisper behind their hands. One aunt sighed deeply, as if she pitied Amara, while another cousin smirked, nudging the person beside him, clearly enjoying the show. A few shook their heads as though they had witnessed the confirmation of what they already believed, that Amara was a failure. Her parents sat back in their chairs, satisfied. Her father's lips curled into a thin smile, her mother giving a slow nod, as though this quiet exit meant victory. In their eyes, they had finally put her in her place, silenced her once and for all. But Amara's silence was not weakness. As she walked out of the dining room, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, her face remained calm. Each step was heavy with pain, yes, but also with control. She wouldn't give them the argument they craved. She wouldn't beg for approval that was never hers to earn. The voices behind her grew faint as she reached the wide doorway. Some were still whispering, others chuckling under their breath. None of them knew that her silence carried more power than words could. Amara stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars scattered across the Enugu sky. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the fresh air wash away the sting of humiliation. Alone in that moment, she allowed one tear to fall freely. Then she wiped it quickly, just as she had at the table. Inside, they thought they had broken her. Outside, she knew she had simply chosen not to fight in their arena. Her battle was bigger, her story greater, and soon they would see it all. For now, she walked quietly into the night, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and whispers, carrying her secret like a crown only she could see. Long before that painful dinner, Amara had been living a very different life from what her family believed. While they thought she was drifting aimlessly, she was in Lagos, working day and night to build something of her own. She had always loved technology, always curious about how things worked, but people around her rarely took her seriously. "You're too ambitious," they told her. "This is not for girls like you." Each comment stung, but it only fueled her determination. Her days often began before sunrise, hunched over her laptop in a small rented office space, the hum of generators filling the background. She sketched out ideas, built prototypes, and pitched to anyone who would listen. Most of the time, she was met with laughter or rejection. Investors dismissed her, some saying her plans were too big, others telling her to go work under a man who understood business better. A few even mocked her to her face, warning her that she would fail and embarrass herself. The hardest blows came from betrayal. A partner she once trusted walked away with her ideas, pitching them as his own. Another promised funding, only to disappear when she had already counted on the money. Each betrayal was like a knife in her back, but still, she refused to give up. She told herself that pain was part of the journey. Amara tightened her circle, working quietly, keeping her moves hidden even from her family. They thought she was wasting her time, but she knew telling them the truth would only invite more doubt and criticism. So she carried her secret like armor. At night, when the city quieted, she sat alone with her laptop, teaching herself new skills, coding until her eyes ached, sending countless emails to foreign firms who barely glanced her way. But persistence paid off. Slowly, she began to catch the attention of international partners. A small tech company abroad responded, then another. Her ideas, once dismissed in Lagos, were being recognized outside the country. For the first time, she felt the spark of validation, not from her family, not from her critics, but from strangers who believed in her vision. The deals didn't happen overnight. There were more rejections, more sleepless nights, and many moments when giving up seemed easier. But Amara held on. Each little win reminded her of the bigger picture she was chasing. She wasn't just building a company, she was building her freedom. Her family had no clue. To them, she was still the quiet, uncertain daughter who lagged behind her sibling. They never imagined that the same girl they mocked at the dinner table was negotiating with foreign investors, drawing up contracts, and planting the seeds of an empire. In silence, Amara carried the weight of her struggles, the scars of betrayal, and the victories no one had seen yet. And that silence, she knew, would one day speak louder than their insults. Amara would never forget the day her life shifted. It had been an ordinary Lagos morning, humid air, traffic already buzzing outside her window, and her nerves tangled in knots. She had spent weeks negotiating with foreign partners, emails going back and forth, late-night video calls that stretched till dawn. And now it all came down to a single contract, one digital signature that would either open the doors she had been knocking on for years or close them for good. Her heart pounded as she stared at her laptop screen. The deal was worth millions, the kind of money that could change everything. For a moment, she doubted herself. Was she really ready? Could she handle something this big? But then she remembered every insult, every rejection, every time her family compared her to others and made her feel small. She steadied her hand, clicked the button, and it was done. The deal was closed. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief, from pride, from the realization that all her sleepless nights had not been wasted. She sat there in her tiny office, her laptop glowing in the dim light, and whispered to herself, "I did it." From that moment, Amara's world began to expand. She didn't waste the money on flashy things to prove a point. Instead, she made careful, quiet investments. She studied industries people around her barely paid attention to. Aviation caught her eye first. Private jets, charter services, a world that seemed out of reach but was filled with opportunity. With part of her earnings, she bought into it, little by little, until she had her own stake in something only the wealthy talked about. She spread her investments wider, pouring money into ventures that promised growth, each move hidden from her family and the people who had once laughed at her. Amara lived modestly on the outside, dressing simply, keeping her head down, never flashing her wealth. She didn't need anyone's applause, not yet. The secret was her shield. She wanted the right moment, the perfect time to let the truth unfold. Not to brag, not to boast, but to show everyone that the girl they had dismissed, the daughter they had labeled the shame, was quietly building an empire behind closed doors. Every family dinner where they mocked her, every comparison to her cousins, she stayed silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew her silence would one day roar louder than any defense she could give. The turning point wasn't just about the millions she secured. It was about the power she now held over her own life. For the first time, Amara wasn't chasing validation. She was writing her story in secret, brick by brick, deal by deal, waiting for the day when she would no longer have to explain herself. The world would see it. Her family would see it. And that day was closer than they could ever imagine. Amara walked out of her parents' house that night with her head held high, even though her heart still carried the sting of their words. The cool Enugu night wrapped around her, and for the first time in hours, she felt like she could breathe again. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she knew exactly what she needed to do. She scrolled to a familiar number and pressed call. Her assistant picked up on the first ring. "Ma'am." Amara's voice was calm, steady. "Prepare the jet. I'll be leaving tonight." There was no hesitation on the other end, only a quick, "Yes, ma'am." "Right away." For a moment, Amara stood there under the stars, the quiet hum of crickets filling the air. Her family thought they had crushed her, but they had no idea what was about to unfold. A faint smile touched her lips as she slipped into her car and told the driver to take her home. Inside her apartment, she walked straight to her wardrobe. Tonight wasn't just about leaving. It was about returning in a way that none of them would forget. She carefully chose her outfit, something elegant yet powerful. A flowing dress that moved with every step, paired with heels that announced her presence long before she spoke. Her hair was styled neatly, her makeup subtle but sharp. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she no longer saw the quiet, timid daughter they dismissed. She saw a woman who had built her own empire in silence. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her assistant. "Everything is ready. Engines warming up." Amara's heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. The thought of her family still sitting in that lavish dining room, laughing and gossiping, unaware of what was about to happen, filled her with a quiet thrill. She slipped on a sleek coat, grabbed her bag, and headed out. The drive to the private airstrip was smooth, the city lights flickering past the windows. As they neared the runway, the faint glow of powerful lights cut through the night, and then came the sound, a deep, steady roar that made her chest tighten. Her jet was waiting. The engines rumbled like thunder, ready to lift her above the world that had once tried to keep her small. She stepped out of the car and onto the tarmac, the wind whipping around her dress as the powerful machine stood before her, sleek and polished under the floodlights. For a moment, Amara just stood there, taking it in. This was more than travel. This was a statement. Every insult, every cruel comparison, every whispered laugh at her expense had led to this moment. She climbed the stairs with grace, each step echoing the truth she had been keeping hidden. She was not their shame. She was their lesson. As the door closed behind her and the engines grew louder, the suspense only built. Tomorrow they would see, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night had dragged on inside the mansion. After Amara's quiet walkout, the family stayed at the table, sipping wine, sharing gossip, and laughing as if nothing serious had happened. A few cousins whispered about her leaving in tears, some mocking, others shaking their heads in pity. Her parents sat proudly, convinced they had finally silenced their wayward daughter. But then, just as the conversation was reaching another round of self-congratulation, a deep rumble cut through the night. At first, it sounded distant, like thunder rolling across the sky. The windows began to tremble, the glasses on the table rattled, and everyone looked around in confusion. "What is that noise?" an aunt asked, clutching her necklace. The rumble grew louder, closer, until it shook the walls of the estate. One of the younger cousins ran to the wide glass doors that overlooked the private strip behind the mansion. His eyes went wide. "There's a plane," he shouted. In an instant, everyone was on their feet, rushing to the windows. Outside, under the glow of powerful floodlights, a sleek private jet was descending like a bird of steel. Its lights pierced the night sky, dazzling and grand, as if the stars themselves had landed on their property. The engines roared as the jet touched down on the strip, smooth and commanding, sending waves of dust and wind across the manicured lawn. Mouths dropped open. No one in the room could look away. The jet rolled forward, stopping just meters from the mansion. The door opened with a mechanical hiss, and a staircase lowered gracefully to the ground. And then she appeared. Amara. She stepped out slowly, every movement measured, her figure framed by the glow of the plane's lights. She was dressed elegantly, her hair flowing, her heels clicking against the staircase like a rhythm meant to silence every mocking word they had spoken earlier. She didn't rush, didn't glance around nervously. Instead, she walked with a calm confidence that made her look untouchable. Her dress shimmered softly in the night breeze, and the wind carried her coat behind her like a banner. She wasn't the quiet, timid girl who had sat silently at the dinner table. She was someone else entirely, stunning, radiant, and completely unbothered. The relatives inside stood frozen, pressed against the glass, unable to believe what they were seeing. A cousin whispered, "Is that her?" Another gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hand. Even the ones who had mocked her earlier could only stare in silence. Her parents, who had worn smug smiles all evening, now stood stiff and pale. The very daughter they had scolded, insulted, and dismissed had just arrived in a way none of them could have imagined. Amara reached the ground, paused, and looked straight toward the house. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence, her jet, her confidence, it spoke louder than any speech. The shame of the family had just made the grandest entrance of them all. The dining room was no longer filled with laughter. Everyone had crowded near the wide windows, their faces pressed close like curious children. The sleek jet glowed outside under the floodlight, a sight so unbelievable that for a moment no one spoke. The same relatives who had mocked Amara earlier were the first to gasp. One aunt who had laughed the loudest now clutched her chest as though she might faint. A cousin who had smirked when Amara left was now stuttering. "Is that really her jet?" Another whispered, "It can't be." "Amara? Our Amara?" Whispers spread quickly, filling the room like fire. Those who had pitied her now looked guilty, while those who had mocked her struggled to hide their shock. Everyone had something to say, yet no one dared to say it too loud. But it was her parents' faces that told the real story. Her father, who only hours ago had called her the shame of the family, stood frozen, his wine glass slipping slightly in his hand. His jaw tightened, his eyes refusing to leave the sight of his daughter walking confidently toward the mansion. Her mother, who had compared her so harshly to her cousins, now gripped the back of her chair, her smile gone, her face pale. Shame turned quickly into regret, and regret turned into fear. The heavy silence was broken when the front doors opened. Amara stepped inside, heels clicking against the marble floor. She looked breathtaking, poised, elegant, untouchable. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, calmly, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. No one dared to speak first. Even the cousins, who usually had the sharpest tongues, were struck dumb. The tension was thick, the air heavy with disbelief. Then Amara's voice cut through it all, calm but strong. "The shame of the family?" She paused, letting the words echo. Her gaze settled on her father, then her mother. "That's what built this jet." The room gasped collectively. Her words landed harder than any insult, sharper than any defense she could have given at the dinner table. For the first time, the power in the room shifted. It wasn't her parents holding authority, it was her. Her cousins, who once looked down on her, now stared at her with wide eyes, their pride melting into awe. The aunts and uncles who had whispered cruel jokes struggled to meet her gaze. Even the younger ones who barely understood the tension could sense it. Amara was no longer the one being judged. Her father opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Her mother lowered her eyes, unable to meet her daughter's steady stare. Amara didn't raise her voice, didn't rant or shout. She didn't need to. Her presence, her jet, and her single sentence had flipped the story completely. For the first time in her life, the entire family was silent in her presence. Not because they dismissed her, but because they finally understood her worth. The room was still heavy with Amara's words, her voice echoing in everyone's mind. The shame of the family? That's what built this jet. For a few long seconds, no one dared to move. Then slowly, the atmosphere began to change. The same relatives who had mocked her only hours ago now scrambled to rewrite their expressions. One aunt, who had laughed at her silence during dinner, suddenly forced a smile. "Amara, my dear, you've grown into such an impressive woman. We always knew you had potential." Her words sounded sweet, but her eyes betrayed the shock she couldn't hide. A cousin who once compared her unfavorably to everyone else now stepped forward eagerly. "Wow, Amara, you should have told us. We would have supported you from the beginning." His voice cracked a little, trying too hard to sound warm. Others quickly joined in, throwing praise as if their earlier whispers and mockery had never existed. Amara stood still, watching them trip over themselves to act calm. She could almost laugh at the sudden shift, but she didn't. Instead, she let the silence stretch until their fake compliments drowned in their own discomfort. Finally, she spoke, her tone calm but sharp. "You mocked me when I struggled. You pitied me when you thought I had nothing. You called me shame when you didn't know the truth. And now that you see the jet, now that you see success, suddenly I am worth your respect." The words stung, and it showed on their faces. Some avoided her eyes, others shifted nervously. Amara continued, her voice steady. Respect is not a gift you hand out when it suits you. It's not something I should beg for at this table. Respect is earned on both sides. And none of you earned the right to belittle me just because my path was different from yours. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Her mother pressed her lips together, staring at the floor. The power they once held over her had slipped away completely, and the whole family felt it. A younger cousin, too honest to hide his feelings, whispered, "She's right." That small voice carried through the room, confirming what everyone already knew but couldn't admit. Amara glanced at him with a faint smile before returning her gaze to the rest. "I don't need your pity, and I don't need your sudden praise. I built what I built without your approval. And if this jet, this success, is what it takes for you to see me, then maybe you were never really looking at me at all." The words settled heavily over them. No one clapped, no one cheered, and for once, no one dared to interrupt. They all knew she had exposed their cruelty, their hypocrisy, and their shallow pride. Amara didn't need to raise her voice or slam her hand on the table. Her truth was louder than any insult they had ever thrown at her. In that moment, it was clear, she was no longer the girl seeking a place in their world. She was the woman who had built her own. The room stayed frozen, every face blank with shock as Amara turned away. No one dared to follow her, no one dared to speak. The same people who had laughed at her just hours ago now stood in silence, watching as she walked with calm steps toward the door. Her heels clicked against the marble, each sound echoing like a reminder that she was no longer the daughter they could dismiss. Outside, the jet waited, its lights glowing like a crown in the dark. The engines purred softly, ready to carry her far above the whispers, the shame, and the wounds of that dinner table. Amara climbed the stairs with the same grace she had entered with, never once looking back. The door closed behind her, sealing off the world she had outgrown. Inside the jet, she sank into her seat, the leather cool against her skin. The cabin lights glowed warmly, wrapping her in comfort. Through the window, she could still see the mansion, the figures of her relatives standing helplessly by the glass. For once, she felt no anger, only peace. As the engines roared louder and the jet lifted off the ground, Amara leaned back, her eyes steady on the night sky. Her thoughts carried her back through every rejection, every insult, every moment they had tried to make her feel small. And yet here she was, flying higher than all of it. Her voice, calm and sure, rose in the silence like a vow. "They called me shame." But shame became their lesson. The jet soared into the clouds, leaving behind nothing but stunned silence and the memory of a woman who had turned pain into power.